Hey everybody, it's James here with Board Game Spotlight, and today we're going to be talking about Manhattan Project Energy Empire. This game is fantastic, and we have Luke, who, with Tom, designed the game and is going to walk us through the game. He's going to kind of talk about some of the fun things about how and why they came up with some of the things that they did, and kind of just how this kind of instant classic that has shot to the top of everyone's top 2016 list, must-have list, instant classic list. I think Richard said it was going to be maybe his top engine building game of all time. That's huge. So this game, as someone who's played it a lot and continues to enjoy playing it, I'm really delighted to have Luke on, and he is going to give us a good walkthrough of the game and lots of insider information. So stick around, check it out. This is Manhattan Project Energy Empire.
Well, thanks for having me on. So I'm going to talk about the game that I co-designed with Tom Jolly, veteran designer of games like Wiz War, Disc Wars, Drakon, Cave Troll. And we worked together to build the Manhattan Project Energy Empire. And it was published by Minion Games. It was released in around December 5th of 2016, towards the tail end of the year. And we're pretty excited because it got a lot of attention, even in people's top 10s of the year, even though it came out just a few weeks before that year ended. So Energy Empire is similar to the original Manhattan Project in that it uses a worker placement mechanism that allows you to place on the main board and then place workers down in your tableau to activate a multitude of cards to perform different functions. So it carries some of those mechanics from the original Manhattan Project, but along with the theme, evolves it to another level. So like the original, the real world Manhattan Project started the nuclear revolution, which led to all kinds of innovations with science and technology, building of electrical grids and so on. So just massive changes in the government, the economics, and the industry of nations throughout the world over the subsequent decades. In the game, you play on three main parts of the board, and those three parts of the board correspond with the government, industry, and commerce. Now, where you play on the main board determines which of the cards in your tableau you're able to activate. So if I play in the government area of the main board, I'm then able to use my government structures on that same turn. I can't use my commerce structures or my industry structures. On a subsequent turn, I might choose one of the actions on the main board in the industry area and then follow it up by using my industry structures. In addition, built into this game, every player starts with a nation card, and the nation cards identify the special starting resources that they receive, which can be things like steel and plastic and science. It could also be they might start with or it could be a coal die or a nuclear die. So this difference in what you start with can also affect the initial strategies that you take as you start the game. Every nation card also provides you with a specific way to climb the United Nations track, which is it's raw victory points, and it's kind of a race to the top. But every nation does this differently. So you need to acquire a certain combination of resources in order for you to be able to allow your nation to climb up that track. There's a whole lot to the game. There's also this big concept that as you go about making your various decisions using the main board locations and acquiring the structures, you'll also be acquiring pollution tokens. These can be pollution tokens, regular pollution tokens, nuclear contamination. There are also oil wells, and these, when they're acquired, go into various rows of your environment. You have this grid of environment that is represented by rows of ocean and forest and air. And as the game goes on, this can get cluttered up with all of these tokens, and that's harmful to you because it decreases scoring at the end, but also throughout the game, various rows can be scored. So there's this dynamic of tokens coming off of a track. This track is the global impact track, which is the timeline for the game. And as you empty one stack of tokens, it will trigger a global impact card. And the first 3 global impact cards in the game are somewhat beneficial cards. They represent good things like free trade and civil rights and various other kind of positive things that will give you everybody at the table a little bit of a boost. And then towards the end of the game, the latter 3 global impact cards are harmful. Things like a missile crisis or nuclear contamination or something like that. But each of these cards will score 1 row of the environment. And that means that if you've heavily polluted your air by chance, and air is what happens to score, you're going to come out with a lower score than everybody else who may not have polluted their air as much. So the effect of the pollution is cumulative throughout the game, but it's also a little bit of a gamble. So players can decide whether they're going to distribute their pollution somewhat equally throughout the 3 rows, kind of hedge their bets, or they can pile it onto one of the rows, hoping that that row doesn't get scored. So there are different approaches to that. But at the end of the game, the entire environmental grid is scored. So it ends up to be a sizable fraction of your score, along with the score that you've acquired from acquiring each of your cards. They're scored. The dice are worth points at the end. There's also these achievement tokens. Oh, I haven't even talked about energy, the fundamental mechanics of the game. So there are these achievement tokens that also score, and so you're acquiring some potentially hidden trackable scoring as the game goes on. Let me back way up to the core mechanic of the worker placement. When you place a worker on the main board, you can place it on any of the empty spaces. But if that space is occupied, you're allowed to use that space also, as long as you stack your worker with energy tokens. And so what you do is you make a stack of energy tokens that has to be the tallest stack on that location. So this is similar to some games like Keyflower, for example. You kind of outbid a location in order to use it. But specifically, it has to be the energy that you use in order to do this. So more energy gives you more choices on the main board. Then when you're working with your tableau, the cards in your tableau and your nation card, they can be activated with either workers or energy. So in a lot of games, a lot of worker placement games, the absolute best move in the game is to get 1 more worker, because that's somehow going to give you 1 more turn than everybody else at the table each round. But in this game, there are no rounds. There's just this kind of smooth motion of one player takes their turn, uses their stuff. The next player takes their turn, uses their stuff. And you decide when you're going to pull back. Well, you can get a lot done if you have a whole lot of energy. If you have 1 more worker, yeah, that's good too, but it's not as good as having this great production of energy. So the emphasis is on the energy. Gets more done in your tableau, and then gives you more options for what you can use on the main board.
Yeah, that was a fantastic overview, and there's a couple of things that you've put into the game that I've really enjoyed, and was one of the reasons why, as you mentioned earlier, it shot up to the top of even my list after only 3 or 4 plays. You could instantly see a couple of those mechanics that really work well together, like the pollution tokens being the tracker time of the game. Every game I've played, that has been different. I had a player who they bought no dice, and they rushed the entire game. And so I had my engine going. I was really excited. And then he's like, all right, well, I look over and there's only a few tokens left in the last stack. So can you just talk about some of those mechanics and so some of the things that maybe inspired you there on some of those unique mechanics, and especially with the no real round structure situation? So that's cool.
I'm a fan of a few games that have the no round structure, and offhand, the ones I can think of are the original Manhattan Project, which feels very much like this. You play your workers until you don't want to play your workers anymore, and then you pull back. In that game, the pullback sometimes feels like a wasted turn, because you need the workers, you need to get them back, and you want to clear out the spaces, but at the same time, you don't get anything on that turn. So I wanted to include something more there. So that's why you generate the energy on that turn. It's also when you can acquire the achievements. You can only gain achievements on that pullback turn. Another game that's does the kind of the no round sequence is Euphoria. So you decide when you're going to pull your dice workers off of the board. And another one is Concordia. In Concordia, it's not a worker placement, but you play an action card each round, and you decide when you're going to pull all the action cards back, because it's like a deck building game, but you have your entire deck is your hand. And when you want more options, you have to make that determination to pull that all back again. With regards to tracking the time using the tokens, there are other games where you do use tokens to try to track time, but I can't offhand think of one that does it that doesn't also correspond to rounds. So you pull off little tokens each round when you're playing Lords of Waterdeep or Castles of Burgundy, but it's the same tokens. They come off, and that's kind of like part of the round setup. Instead, I wanted kind of the round setup becomes fluid. Like the round can end in the middle of your turn, and then you kind of go on with the rest of your turn. It can happen really at any time.
Yeah, it does happen quite often in weird times. At least somebody will say, "Hey, that's the end of my turn." I'm like, "Oh, wow." Anyway, it's messed me up quite a few times watching people, the way their strategy has affected what I'm trying to do. And so I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, it doesn't have the take that the original Manhattan Project does." Because you really only interact a lot on the, like you were speaking about earlier, the outbidding mechanic of the locations. Was there anything that particular that made you move away from the take that from the original game to this?
Well, that's a really interesting question. We could probably spend all night on that one, because there are fans who really love the take that in the original Manhattan Project, and I love the take that in that game also, except for that one time. That one time when I completely got bombed out of the game by some not well-meaning friends of mine. And it's one of those games where potentially players could gang up on someone, and also potentially that kind of attacking might be beyond what is strategic for those players. So sometimes you can get in those situations where it can kind of get that bad blood going on. But that's not any more than any other of these, so many great games do that. We just played, earlier this week, we played the Game of Thrones game, the big one, takes 5 hours. And boy, one player was eliminated. They had one guy on one non-producing area of the board, and they were toast. It was a brutal game, and you kind of laugh and you have fun with it. The Manhattan Project, the original I'm speaking of, is a really interesting game because it is a Euro game that absolutely has this kind of take that stuff in it. And for some people that was out of place, and for some people that's really refreshing. They want that in there. Well, it turns out that when Minion Games was first interested in this game, which was built without the intention originally of being a sequel to the Manhattan Project. Its original name was called Drill Baby Drill. And there was a little bit more of emphasis on the oil and that part of the game. But one of the aspects was in the game was absolutely kind of this take that attack mechanism, and it was these treaty cards. And you would play a treaty card, and you would say, an example might be, you gain 2 oil, and everybody else at the table loses 1. And it would be painful. And for you, it'd be a benefit. For everybody else, it'd be a loss. And it wouldn't necessarily affect everyone like it affects everyone hypothetically equally, but the player didn't have any oil, didn't lose anything. And that player who's got the heavy oil strategy really needed that oil on their next turn is very upset at you. So there was more of that in the prototype. As we worked on it, some of the feedback that we got was that this is something that some players wanted to see less of. And so we moved away from the treaties. We dropped the treaties. We were kicking and screaming about it too. For a while, we're like, oh, we really need this kind of to balance things out. Well, no, we developed some other parts of the game better. That's when we kind of brought in the United Nations track, actually, and then tied that to the nations. All of that happened during development with Minion after we'd already signed the game with them. So the United Nations track and the use of the individual nations built in, tied to that, ends up being a really interesting part of the game that we wanted more than just building your engine, getting more stuff, and repeating ad nauseum. We wanted something else. So the UN track becomes a race, but it's a race where everybody does something different in order to compete in that race. And that's interesting because a lot of games you have to choose to go into a certain area, and that's going to necessitate requiring the same resources. For example, if I want to build more settlements on the map, I'm going to need whatever it is, wheat and steel or something. But in this, it's every nation is custom in that regard. So there's the race there. That's one of the layers of interaction. There's the competition for the cards and the achievements on the board. Some of the achievements are better than others. Some of them are easier to accomplish than others. Some of them are better for certain players. And it's one of those areas where a subtle part of this game is you can hate draft those achievements.
Yes.
You can
Yes, you
rob
can.
a guaranteed 5 victory points from somebody if you grab an achievement they really want, and you could, well, yeah, it's kind of okay for you, but it harms them more than it helps you. Grabbing the cards, if you're watching other people's strategies, sometimes a card that may have moderate use for you, but it's going to really ramp up somebody else's engine, is one you'll want to grab. Also, you can overproduce energy and place extra energy with your worker on spaces. And when you do that, you effectively block other players out of using that spot. So
Yeah.
it's definitely Euro. It's definitely light interaction, and but it's not zero interaction. It is there's absolutely, your play has to be responsive and tactical to other people's decisions.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be Euro if Rado puts it up on his list. He's not going to have any of the take that stuff in his house. So I did find that mechanic of blocking people getting certain achievements, because you'll see someone else get one you didn't really care about, but then the next one comes out and you see the guy or gal to your left and you're like, man, that's perfect for them. If I let them get that, that's just going to be too easy for them. And so then you may rush to try to get it. So that's happened quite a few times. Have you seen any of the countries, since we're talking strategy, have you seen any of the countries that perform more well than others? Anything like that?
No. We've seen players struggle to work with certain nations in certain games. And there's always going to be this, these random chances. There's just the right building over there. There's just the right achievement over there. And it matches up with this player, and no one else happens to be competing with the things they're trying to do, where they can jump out ahead. But when you go to choose your nations at the beginning of the game, the board's already set up. So the way we wrote the rules is you set up the board, which means you can see all the cards that are on the board. You can see the achievements that are available. You get 2 nations and 2 achievements, and you get to look, and you can actually plan your starting strategy. Now, that's not something that starting players are going to be able to do very well. But if you've played a few times, you're going to look at that and you're going to say, well, you know what? This might be the game where France is going to be better, or the Soviet Union might be what I'm going to go for this time. That said, I've done really well playing France because you start out with a nuclear die. A lot of people would see that nuclear die and say, no way. I'm going to be, because you are almost certainly going to get nuclear contamination right away. From grabbing a clean die pretty quick you can mitigate that potential cost. So I've won playing France and going like heavy nuclear, having tons of energy pretty quickly. I haven't done this, but I've seen Tom Jolly win with almost no dice. And my friend Sean's done real similarly too, where it's like no dice. Once in a while he gets an oil when he needs it and still manages to pull out the win by being super clean, super efficient, and nailing all of the achievements with exact precision, like not going over, not over investing in anything. So I have no answer on like, no one has been able to find, fortunately, the like go-to nation or go-to. We've had some people debating what like go-to first move is, and hilariously, they don't agree. So some people think like the go-to first move is you go and you got to get a die, and you got to get as many dice as you can right away. But then I say, you know what? It's a great move to go get 3 oil. Like right up front, you can actually put off buying dice as long as you need to if you have enough oil to float you. Grabbing a couple of cards right up front is fantastic. Some people think that if you start climbing the UN track early and you'll stay ahead, that's great. I don't think that at all, because I want to use those resources to build my engine before I go to the UN. So have
you ever seen anybody win with kind of ignoring the UN track?
Sort of. I've seen people most like ignore it until the very end of the game. In fact, I won a game recently where I went real heavy energy right away. I was polluting the heck out of my environment, and I just built this sprawling engine. My environment was like more than halfway full of tokens, but I had this epic engine. And then from then on, every turn, I was accumulating victory points, cleaning my environment, and climbing the UN track. I was actually the lowest on the UN track. I totally won, though.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good indicator of a well-designed game, that there isn't no one's broke the game yet. And, obviously people are going to try. That's, our mathematician friends in the board gaming world, they're going to get in there, our accountant type people, they're going to get in there and try. And
well, I'll tell you how to break the game.
Okay, go ahead.
If you want to break the game, every turn, go to that spot where you get 2 money or you get 4 money and everybody else gets 2 money. And just keep doing that. Just keep giving away a bunch of resources, and pretty soon everybody's just going to have way, way too much stuff. And the whole game is going to just be everybody's going to have too much stuff. It's not a strategic way to play.
Right.
But yeah, you can kind of clutter up the game with too much generosity on that spot.
I've done that before just because I was really poor, and so I kept going there just because I really needed $4. And that will definitely happen.
It's there for an emergency. Just use that for emergencies.
Well, it's very similar to my real life. So, okay, so I really think, and I think one of the reasons that you and Tom are receiving such high praise for this game is it's an instant classic. You guys have nailed 4 or 5 really tight mechanics, and they wove together like just perfectly. There's nothing that seems clunky about the game. It's gorgeous. James and Minion, they did a fantastic job with the components. It's a great price. I mean, there's really nothing negative to say about the game, which I always have something, that I can pick at. And I mean, it's just a fantastic game. And you've really done a great job with the game.
Wow.
Pretty awesome.
I don't know what to say. Thank you very much. We're very happily surprised with the response. I mean, you work on anything for any extended period of time, and you like to think that you got out, all of the little kinks. With this one, this is a game that we literally at least twice a week, or approximately twice a week for a year or more. And we still wanted to play. And that was pretty cool. And we wanted to play it even when some stuff was broken. But I think probably the reason why we were able to tighten stuff up the way we did was we have a lot of game breakers. These are game breakers in our group. My co-designer, Tom Jolly. Okay, so first of all, Tom Jolly's an engineer. He builds 3D puzzles. For fun, he learns physics. Yeah, he's got this mind that is really incredible. And when he sees any way to break a game, anything that you can iteratively continue and further the gap between you and the other players, he will do it. And he will find that hole. So he's found several other people in our playtest group. They did break the game. They broke the game over and over and over again. And then they'd come back the next week and they'd say, wait, what? Why can't I do that thing I did last week? And I said, well, because that was broken. The achievements are going to be capped at 5 victory points. You can't get 30 points off of one achievement. That makes the game unfun. Then there's one good way to win. Oh, man, well, that's no fun. 5 victory points for each achievement. Turns out those kinds of things, those kinds of limits are what force you into not following the same path every time you play. You've got to diversify to a degree. In an engine builder, there's always that danger that people will find that one thing and stick with it and then just, kind of play the same way every time. And with this, we wanted it so that you can target your efforts and go in different ways every time you come at it. And by necessity, it had to have that kind of diversity because of how frequently we were playing it and testing it and so forth. But to impress people like yourself and Rado and Z Garcia and all these other folks who've thought highly of it, it just completely blows me away. I'm very, very proud of what we did with this game.
I'm a redneck from Alabama, so I don't know that that's very impressive, but those other guys are pretty good. So, no, I mean, I think Rod, didn't he say he put this at the #1 engine builder on his list?
He said it was probably #1 engine builder of all time, and it was his top game for 2016.
So here's a guy who plays all the games. He, as long as it obviously fits in his criteria, but majority of Euro games. So that's and tying that into what you said is, I've played this probably 4 to 5 times now. I've played it different every time, and I've enjoyed it every time. And that's probably one of the things there's so many games that I play that if I play it 2 or 3 times, I could be done with some games. I don't ever really want to play them again. This is one that will never be traded away. It will always be on the shelf. And so, I mean, as someone on my end who's tried to design games, I know how you have to feel right now. It's got to feel like a proud parent who just had like graduation and boom.
It's interesting because in some ways I feel like we broke a few rules building it. There's all of these things that you're told as designers to do or to not do, and things that you have to keep in mind as a publisher in order to build a game that you don't break the bank on. With this one, so for example, if you pick up the box, this game is heavy. Holy smokes. And when I first would bring it, when I started to think about bringing this to publishers, I don't know what the exact count is, but it's a heavy box. I think it ended up being about 3 something pounds. But it's in a small Euro size, and it's not one you'd really expect to be that heavy. But it's like 500 plus components. It's one of those things where you take it out of the box and publishers will look at it and go, oh, that's a lot of stuff. And passersby are like, whoa, what's this? And you get that kind of that drool factor where people are drawn as we would play this game and they would just come over and people would say, oh, I'm having a bitgasm. And that's where I learned that phrase. So they're looking at it. They love all these bits, all this stuff. But all those bits, they serve a function in this game that some of the bits actually make some of the mechanics easier to do. I kind of have this, I love games that are elegant and clean. Concordia I really like. It's really clean. You play the card, you move the little wooden bits, that's it. Some games, they try to minimalize things so much that the mechanics become clunkier, where it's like, well, on this card and over in this corner is this attribute, and there's that other attribute over there, and if you count up all these other things over here, you'll have this other attribute. And so you find yourself like playing bookkeeper all the time to figure out what's going on. In the Manhattan Project Energy Empire, when you want to buy something, you look at the symbol, you see, oh, I see a science and a money. I look down, I see a science and a money, and you just throw it over there and you're done. You are literally not doing any math to do the math. You can just use the components. The components are that function. The timer for the game is components, just stuff you take off the track and drop it here. You never have to count the track after the initial setup unless you really want to. So there's various little like subtle things there where these components simplify the game with their multitude.
Yeah, you guys crushed it with your iconography and the rule book. I mean, the rule book is fantastic. The art's perfect. I think a little guy named Joshua Capel maybe worked on this.
Yeah. So Tom and I wrote the rule book. We labored over it very, very heavily. We actually modeled it after the rule book in the original Manhattan Project. In fact, the original Manhattan Project rule book, I model all my rule books after that. It's one of the only games where I sat down, read the rule book, and I 100% knew how to play. So many games, I will sit down, read the rule book, and go, oh, dang, I'm going to go watch a video. I'm going to see if my friend is going to teach me this instead. That's happened to me many times. But so when we took the rule book to Josh Capel was pretty impressed with what we had to start. And the icon layout was mostly in our prototypes. Our prototypes were very playable, very clean. But then Josh was able to just make it just pop, just outstanding. Super happy with the way the box looks, especially. I can't stop looking at it. I love to look at the box. It's real. I was also really impressed that even though this game's quite a bit bigger, the scale was managed to be done so that these two boxes, they're almost identical. They fit right on the shelf right next to each other. Also able to clean up some of the wording on some stuff too, where we knew exactly what we wanted it to say, but he was able to wordsmith it with a few, just like cutting down the words to make it just right, fit on the cards.
Yeah, because I think I could take someone even pretty new to the hobby and throw your game down, and I think they would get it after around 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because the icon layout is perfect. It matches perfectly with the resources. Everything flows really well. And I think that's just all these little layers. It's like a layer of an onion, just unpeeling that onion. You guys nailed them, just quite a few different areas.
One of the things that I'm a huge fan of, and we kind of stumbled this on, not on accident, but out of necessity, was what do you do with the back of the nation card you're not using? And I am an advocate, and I will say that every single game needs a player reference card. And that's games that are very simple, games that are complex, all of them. And just having, here's what you do on your turn. Here's what you do on your work turn. Here's what you do on your generate turn. I find that this card right here is kind of the magic piece in really making a complex game a lot more comprehensible. And it kills me that there are games that don't have anything like that out of the box. And you spend a lot of your time kind of asking the question, like, what's the third phase? What do we do after that? Orleans, which I love, it's like 7 phases. There's 7 phases in that game and no player reference card. You got to let go. So I actually keep the rule book out, because even though I played it like 6 times, and I love that game, I played it like 6 times, I still forget the phases sometimes. I go, wait,
Yeah, especially if
did
you've
we
had
do
some
that?
time in between since you last played it. So that's
Always forget to get the money for the farmer. That's the one.
Yeah. Or somebody's always asking, "Hey, pass me the rule book," and so the player reference card, eliminates a lot of that if you've done it right. So,
Yeah.
well, Luke, that's all I've got for questions. Man, I've really enjoyed this, and I am super excited for you. You guys have, not that you weren't on the map already, but this is going to be a big hit for a lot of people, and congrats.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I thanks for having me on, and look forward to seeing next stuff you're producing too. Oh,
yeah,
and 50,000 views on your top 11. That's what I saw. You've already beat out Rado. That's what I saw.
Hey, it's not a competition, but I think people like to see the games, and so my shtick is to show the game and quickly overview it so people can get a grasp of, hey, is this something that I would like to add to my collection? So,
well, very well
nobody
played,
wants
sir.
to see this. Nobody wants to see this. They want to see the game. So, I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to what you do in the future, and we get to do this a whole bunch more, hopefully.
Excellent. Yeah, we've got other irons in the fire, and we'll hopefully have another game coming out within about a year.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
All right.
Keep us updated.
All right. You take care.
All right, Luke.